Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 154. Should I digitize my own designs? When, how, why, and how much? Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into the Takeup. I'm glad to have you here on what we have come to call Education Friday, with all the shows variously going on in the industry to help you learn about what you do for production, what you do for art, what you do for digitizing, embroidery, and often print and otherwise. But today we have a question that keeps coming up for me. This is something that I have taught many times. I've taught an entire workshop based on the concept that people might want to get into digitizing and what might be holding them back, or maybe why should they, why shouldn't they, what are the differences between working in-house and outsource. And so I have talked about this quite a lot. And as someone who worked for most of their career as an in-house digitizer for a middle to large size company, it depends on how you frame that, uh, I've done a lot of work in-house that is specific to the shop that I was in, and I've done a lot of work for people outside of that as well. A lot of my early work and the early work I did in digitizing was sometimes subsidized by the fact that I was allowed to work on the software in off hours. So I have done every kind of step of the digitizing process, including developing techniques for particular products, working with development of not only those products, but of courses based on particular products or particular techniques. So I've been kind of all around digitizing, from the on the floor commercial person working on logos to someone digitizing outsourced to someone who had their own stock designs and other collections as I ran. Truthfully, for a part of my time, I was part of a subscription, a design subscription service wherein every month you'd get designs from particular designers, and I was one of those designers. So I've kind of been on a lot of different sides of digitizing, and honestly I have a lot to say about the concept of designing and digitizing and where that line lies, and especially whether or not you need to digitize to embroider, and when you might want to, when you might not. So there's a lot we can talk about today. I certainly want to hear from you too. If you are here live, by all means, jump in the comments and share your experiences. And I would love to hear from you, even if you're in the hashtag replay squad and you are out there listening to this off hours, some other time, podcast style, then please, by all means, jump in on the comments and questions. Even in the comments down the road, we like to answer those later, even if it's not right live with us. But as we are live right now, I am going to jump in and go ahead and talk to a few people who have appeared live. As you guys know, if you're on Replay Squad, you can go ahead and fast forward this. You don't want to, but if you're here live, you're part of the community, and I'm going to talk to the reciprocators. So we have showing up nice and early, Cindy King, earlier than I did. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Cindy. Hope things are going well in Texas. Frank coming in from over in the UK, across the pond, a great sharer and supporter of digitizers and embroiderers all over the world. Thank you, Frank. We've got Barb showing up, saying hi to everybody. Wonderful. Good to see everybody. We have Marta showing up from Texas as well. Happy to have you in, Marta. Ramona is in too. She's going in, and she is a digitizer also. So an outsourced digitizer you may use. So I'm sure she's got some opinions on whether or not you need to digitize yourself and how much, but we'll talk about that. And Clara is in as well. So good afternoon from sunny California. Good afternoon to you from actually sunny New Mexico today. So Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I am, out in the great American Southwest, if you wondered. Suffice it to say, we actually have something to talk about today. Now, I am going to keep this light and breezy. This is because this is not a technical course. This is not something where we're going to get into moving around points necessarily. Might talk a little bit about pricing, might talk a little bit about other things related to whether or not you want to digitize, but I'm going to keep this one a little short. I know I say that every time, but this one should be pretty easy, pretty short. If you've got some questions or comments, by all means, jump in. But let's get into it. What's the major question at hand, right? This is the thing. We are looking to answer the age-old question of whether or not you need to digitize. And I have a lot of opinions about that. And you might, wonder, why did I decide to talk about this again right now? Well, the truth of the matter is, had a few different people who have asked me this question recently, and some people who kind of came up feeling guilty about the way they had to source designs. Now, some people understood it immediately when I said, hey, that's totally fine. If you're outsourcing, it's totally fine. Whatever mixture of these things you come up to is a valid way to make things work as long as it works for your shop. But there are some people who really have kind of hangups. They feel poorly if they're not doing things the right way for a real embroiderer, a real digitizer. So the question is, should I digitize my own designs? And the problem with this question is that it is not a yes or no answer. This is not a yes or no question here. The one thing I will say to me is yes or no is that everyone, in my opinion, should own some form of digitizing software if you are an embroiderer. Because there are kinds of digitizing that I like to call constructive or functional digitizing that are not in the milieu of interpreting art into stitches. They are not as technically difficult. There are little cleanup things that you can do to repair a design, to make a design work better, to add body to a design where you have to make small corrections that require you to add stitches. And when that happens, editing software alone is really not the best way for that to happen. So the first thing I'm going to say is the question, should I digitize my own designs? No, I don't think that's the actual question. And certainly none of that has to do, in my mind, with owning and having digitizing software. Because a lot of people, when they're asking this question, they're actually asking me, do I need to go to the expense of having digitizing software? And in my opinion, I think the answer should be yes. For most shops, the answer for this is yes. Now, if you're creating things on your own, you are just starting out, we can talk about when this has to happen. Everybody absolutely, without fail, should, in my opinion, start out with software that can create text, that can composite more than one design, compose, put more than one design together on the field, can add text to a design. And like I said, do name drops, do top and bottom naming over and under designs, and styling and handling those letters correctly. That is something everybody needs at every stage. If you have an embroidery machine and you don't have software to compose different designs together and add text, I think you're missing the boat. That is the very first thing you absolutely need, in my opinion. However, I am just going to make it clear. I think that everybody should have a modicum of digitizing knowledge first, because it also helps us communicate with outsourced digitizers. And secondly, that everybody should have digitizing software if you're going to run an embroidery machine, especially commercially, even on a small scale, because there are things that we can do to enhance designs, to repair designs, and simply to deal with the realities of embroidery. And some of them are available in editing software, but some of them are not and require us to create stitches. Whenever we're creating stitches, one by one in editing software is just not the same as being able to create some stitches like manual underlays or reinforcements, or as you guys may have seen, shape underlays where you're stitching down the material under a design before it runs to enhance stability. It's something that I often teach, global shape underlays. These things are easily created with digitizing software, much more of a pain editing software, and depending on your digitizer, may be difficult to explain. So we're going to talk about all these reasons again. But the first thing, should I digitize my own designs, or should I digitize in-house? It comes down to this big question that people think is binary, right? In-house versus outsource. And this is where I get to bring up my big funny graphic one more time. Versus, here's the fight, in-house versus outsource. What's the answer? It's not versus. These are not two mutually exclusive things. The truth of the matter is, there really isn't that question. So yes, we can say the question is, should I digitize my own design? Should I digitize in-house? And what I'm going to make clear, and I know I've said it before, if you've been on this show before, you just have to understand it's not a binary. There is no big fight match. There is no versus in-house outsource that should exist. The question really is this: is there a difference? Yes. Is there a difference between doing more work in-house and outsource? Absolutely. Will people who work with in-house digitizing also outsource? Yes. Will people who are outsourcing need to occasionally digitize something or decide to make themselves able to do simple digitizing by themselves for good reasons? Absolutely, yes. So it's one of those things. Is there a difference? No. Is this a binary? No, it's not a binary. This is something where there is a sliding scale, a spectrum of how much you do. But we should examine the reasons why we do this, right? I always have to haul my little graphics out because this is the truth. You guys always know that I talk about pillars and pitfalls, so much so that I also have graphics for pillars and pitfalls. When what I mean by that is, in any particular portion of this work and the work itself, in being a decorator and in a portion of this, there tend to be really good habits to have. Pillars, things you should do. And then there are pitfalls where I get to be the scary skull man. Pitfalls, things that are going to trip you up. So pillars and pitfalls exist in every one of these things. And rather than just play with the graphics, I'm just kind of explain to you this kind of process. The pillars, the pros of in-house digitizing versus the cons. There are cons, but for me, no matter these pros and cons, it really is not this binary. You don't just digitize or not digitize. You have this binary choice that's an illusion, and really everything is on this sliding scale. We should have the tools we need in order to reinforce designs. We should have the tools we need in order to compose designs, to add text for sure. And then I think we should be able to add stitching when we need to and do simple digitizing, simple alteration on files. These things are just critical to the running of the business. Plus, for me, for my money, I don't want to have a machine that I have no control over. And as an embroiderer, I think not having digitizing software, not being able to create the design that runs the machine, there is a little lag control there that I don't love. There's some reasons, but we'll talk about that. We've got a couple of comments as well. And here's the other thing I'm going to bring in. We got a good comment from Ramona, which is absolutely true. Regarding the software, note you do not need to purchase the machine brand software to do digitizing. Absolutely not. Third-party software, other softwares will do digitizing. Almost every machine will accept, at the very least, a DST file. It was a Tajima file, but it has become the industry standard. DST stitch files really only contain coordinate points for the needle to drop and codes to tell the needle to jump, to stay up or stay down. That's really all it contains, aside from that movement, which is hoop movement. So these things are universal. All machines will read them. Just about all digitizing softwares are going to output them. And I think just about is a lie. All software that I've seen will output a file that works on just about any commercial machine. There are machine files that have specialty features like having embedded colors, like having other things you can do with the machine. There are very few of them, but they do have like transfer files that allow things like needle assignment, that allow things on very particular machines, like slowing down particular needles, things like that. Mostly, the files are fairly universal. We all have to be able to accept at least DST files in every machine. And with that, that means that just about any software is going to be able to produce a file that your machine can read. It may or may not do all of the special features that your machine has. Most of the time, especially in the commercial zone, we are not worried about that. We just need to throw on that file. The ease of use can improve if we have things like colors that stay with the file, but they are not necessary by any means. The one thing that makes a difference with software brands, and this is something I've said repeatedly, is when you are choosing an outsourced digitizer, or if you are working with an outsourced digitizer with whom you've got a great relationship, it may make sense for you to get, and this could be additionally or entirely, the same brand that digitizer uses, because it may allow you to edit their working files if they give them to you. Working files contain the original drawn vector elements. As we can see in my thumbnail today, if you look at the little happy face up there between the E and T on the Takeup, all those little control points on that vector style shape will not be available unless you're in the same software that design was created. So we can't do things like move the edges of things, change stitch types, change underlays, unless we have that original file. Now, there are certain editing things that we can do in editing software, but that is one way we want to match up our software. Otherwise, use the software that makes the most sense for you, that fits your budget, that fits your use case. And here's the other thing people don't tell you. I am a multi-software user. I always have been. Over the course of my career, I've used multiple softwares whenever that was possible. And what you can also do is many softwares will allow you to bring in stitch files and allow you to then draw under, draw in, or work around them. One of the use cases I see very frequently in my own world, you guys know I work in Brilliance, and we have produced a really wonderful patch software called Merrily that makes patch edges very automatically. I see people who are using other softwares who use our software as the last mile between whatever they have already made. They're used to their existing software. They make a design, but they want it on a patch, and then they throw it in Merrily so they can get the automated edging and the patch tools. These are all possible. You don't even need to necessarily stay with one. The only thing to remember, once again, working files don't go from one to the other. So if you want to do any editing on that file you're bringing in, you're not going to be able to edit the working file, the vector style shapes, in one software from the other. However, once you've got that set up, you can bring that stitch file into other softwares and then do work around, below, and sometimes between elements there, especially if you break them up in the software by breaking them at a color change. You can then work even inside of a design by breaking into the design, splitting it into multiple pieces, and then working in between two layers. You can work into the sequence. Ask me how I know. I've had to rehab lots of legacy designs where someone loves the design, doesn't want to work on anything else in design, and rather than recreate it because the design's working okay, but we're working in maybe a new material, I will add underlay, work underneath the piece, or have many, many times long before the advent of Merrily, which made my life much faster in this respect, made patches, added global underlays, shape underlays, and knockdown style stitching, mesh stitching that holds down materials. And back before that was an automated option for me, I made those with tatami fill stitches under the entire design. I digitized my own knockdown style light mesh fill that kept material down, that kept loops and fur down so I could run designs on it. So truthfully, you can rework on top of design. But let's talk about this for a second. Let's actually get back to the original topic. So, really, the question people have is, should I digitize my own designs? And I'm actually going to give you guys a little bit from one of these larger workshops I did. I did a big workshop called Debating Digitizing, where the entire crux of the thing was, hey, if you're thinking about digitizing, let's talk about the reasons you might want to do that. What does it really look like? What does drawing look like? What does it look like to set up a digitizing station? What's the real investment? And does it make sense for you? So that was this class that I did 3.5 hours of talking about that. Do we do digitizing? Does it make sense to you? And what does it really look like when you start to bring digitizing in house? But I'm going to go ahead and give you some segments out of that. This was a paid class, but as people know, paid classes become fodder for my stream eventually because I just want to share this stuff with you guys. Let's bring this up. This is evaluating expectations. What will digitizing do for you? Is a section of that class that I talked about. And this really gets into the answer. Should I digitize my own designs? But it's not just should you, it's what are the reasons? As you guys know with me, I am someone who is always going to want to give you an idea of what the reasons might be and kind of let you make the judgment for yourself because nobody knows your situation, your shop, hey, even your art or craft, your design goals like you do. You know these goals and you know what you need. And I'll show you some examples of what I did and why I really needed to digitize in house and why most of the shops that I worked for, the mix was heavily favoring me as an in-house digitizer doing almost everything with very rare outsource opportunities. So let's talk about it. What will digitizing do for you? And let me go ahead and grab those slides and start moving those around. So here's the first thing, and I know I've said this a million times, but if you are just joining me for the first time and you're asking yourself the question whether you should digitize or not, it's great that you want to digitize. I think most people should if they can, and they're working on embroidery machines at the very least to have a basic understanding of what it is. But this is the thing I have to repeat over and over again. I don't want to pay for files is not enough justification to digitize in house. And I said probably here, but I think since I've taught this class, I will go ahead and go on the record to say it just isn't. This is not the best reason. If somebody pitches to you that digitizing is a cost-cutting measure, especially if you are a solopreneur, you are somebody out there working on your own, so you're doing the production, you're doing the sales, you're doing everything, this is not enough justification for you to bring your digitizing in-house. If you're already happy with the digitizer you have and you don't have any other reasons to do it, but to not pay the money for the digitizer to do the work, this problem is not a digitizing problem. This is not, and it's not even an expense problem. This is a pricing problem. If you find that you just can't get paid for the amount it takes for you to hire that digitizer on, and you are a solopreneur or someone who really is going to lose a lot of time, or you do not have the staff or the time to learn or become a full-fledged digitizer, think twice before you just bring all of it in-house. Now, like I said, once again, this is not a binary. Let me bring myself up a little bigger here. This is not a binary. By all means, we can talk about what it's like to have some digitizing in-house and some outsourcing. I think we will. But if this is your only reason you're thinking, I don't think I want to pay for the digitizer anymore. This guy keeps taking 5, 10, 20, 30 bucks every time I got a job and I don't want to pay for it. That's not a great reason to digitize unless maybe if your designs are very simple and you don't have a lot of work to do, if you're somebody who already has a lot of skill, maybe you're a vector artist or you were a digitizer before and you're just not doing it now, you haven't been, and now you just want to take it back over, great. If you're someone who is learning to digitize for the first time or for whom it does not come naturally, making yourself a digitizer for a shop while you're also running production, doing sales, running the books, is something you shouldn't take lightly. And that doesn't mean like I said, once again, I think you should have digitizing software. I think you should know the basics of how to do it. And I think you should engage in it so that you understand the process, even if it's not something you're doing every day. And like I said, really viable reasons to have in house digitizing. But this is the worst one. Not because you don't necessarily save. Hey, if you've got overhead, you've got time, and that time is not better spent doing business development or better spent doing something else, by all means, do this. And now, once again, where I'm going to differ with what I just said here, not this is about digitizing full-fledged designs, things that have some detailed logo work, jacket backs, artistic work. That's what I'm talking about here. Names, absolutely do this in house. You shouldn't have to wait to drop names. You shouldn't be paying somebody $5 to drop a name on something or to put text underneath an existing stock design. You should learn that. You need to know enough about embroidery settings, about digitizing, about needles, thread, tensions, and the rest, not just to do your embroidery work from stock work, but in order to be able to change settings like pull and push compensation, in order to understand density well enough to make your letters look good, and to know what will work at what size, because no matter who you are, you're going to be adding text. You will be personalizing, you'll be adding text to designs, even if you have them made. That is the baseline that you need. However, going on to full-fledged artistic digitizing, if all you want to do is save money, it's probably your worst reason. Not to mention, there are good reasons that I think are worth kind of exploring here. So, yes, can you be a successful embroiderer without ever digitizing? You can. And by this, once again, I mean digitizing a full design. I think you'll be a better embroiderer if you can make small repairs, add underlays, add things like knockdown. Now, knockdown stitch, trademarked as directly an Brilliance enthusiast, and that is an editing software that allows you to add an automated knockdown so that you don't have to digitize. However, if you don't have that, you will need to add that yourself. Certainly, if you want to add things like additional stitching to reinforce something that has a gap, additional stitching to create sort of internal basting, which is that global shape underlay. Those things are not going to be automatic, at least to the to the date of me recording this. So that's something you're going to have digitizing software to do. And also, if you're going to alter designs that people are doing for you, like I said, you may want to have that same digitizing software that your people have. However, yes, you can do this. I've known people who have gone decades in an embroidery business without digitizing full-fledged designs themselves. Often, they do smaller work sometimes. They will do lettering work, absolutely. Sometimes very simple work, but they don't become full-fledged in-house digitizers. Is that a way you can go? Absolutely. And in fact, what I'd say is even if you're learning, here's that dovetailing method that I said I was going to talk about in the description. Even if you are learning to digitize, there's going to be a point where if you're already running embroidery, especially in a commercial world, or if you have something you've promised somebody, hey, even in the home space, even if you've just promised somebody a favor and you decided to learn to digitize to do it, totally fine for you to decide, I'm not there yet. I need to get this stuff done. Have somebody digitize this piece. But then what we do is bring it in. Go watch some of my episodes in design analysis, and you know what comes next. We're going to measure all of the fills. We're going to measure all the overlaps. We're going to measure all the densities, find out stitch lengths, stitch angles, densities, overlaps, pull compensation, push compensation. Once we compare it to the sample we've run, and we use the designs that we're ordering from folks as educational tools for ourselves so that as we ramp up, if we are going to continue digitizing for ourselves or bring it entirely in-house, we have that basis of well-known designs that run well. Like known good is what I usually say, known good designs that run well on the machine that look the way they should. And we can look at those for the settings that we need and for inspiration for how to get things put together. Second thing to remember, like I said, you can and should learn to digitizing while outsourcing. It's just what I said. I think that even if you're outsourcing and even if you're someone who isn't going to go into full-fledged digitizing, design analysis can teach you so much about embroidery and how designs are put together that it's worth doing. It's well worth your time to watch a design run carefully and to make some measurements. See how much thinner a satin stitch is on the material than it was when it was in the software. See what the density looks like and how much coverage you have. See how layers are put together and how things are overlapped and how the designer, the digitizer, managed to make that sequence of elements work as a design. You can and should learn to digitize while you're still outsourcing. And I think that's the thing, especially if you're in business. If you're somebody who's in an embroidery business, whatever size it is, and you're already running and you think you're going to switch to digitizing in-house, This is going to be a ramping up process. It's not going to be an immediate cut. And even then, there's an entire possibility that as you're learning, even as you get pretty good, there are designs that are more detailed than you would think, or designs that are of a style that you're not proficient in that you decide to send out and use those as educational tools. And the one example that I always give about this throughout my career is though I can do them and have done them, I am not, I would say, the most skilled at naturalistic animals. And especially when people would come in and say, here is my show dog. I want my specific dog on a full jacket back or on my left chest. It has to have this fur pattern that's very intricate. I want to make sure I see exactly how that goes. And we want all the pelt lines. We want all of those kind of shag lines that are in a coat to be represented. Can I do it? Yes. Have I done it? Yes. Do I think mine are as good as someone who specializes in that? No. And I often hired those out to people who are animal specialists. I know I've told you that a million times, but the thing is, I know other people who do it for other reasons. Like they're good at design, they do all right, but for some reason they just haven't managed to get caps yet. Centering out for them hasn't worked really well. Very small text isn't great for them. They're not good at shading and gradients, but they're great at just flat spot color logos. And they hire that more extensive stuff out. Or they've got time to knock together a left chest, but they don't have time to do a full-fledged artistic jacket back. So those go off to someone else to do a more complicated work while they're still able to do the work they need to do. And simplistic left chests, monograms, lettering, anything like that, anything up to that point, they keep in house because it's inexpensive, easy to do, and they can work quickly. So you can and should learn to digitize while you're still outsourcing. That's fine. If you're starting out and you already started outsourcing, learning to digitize, once again, isn't the flip of a switch. You can absolutely dovetail in. And like I said previously, I'm going to beat this dead horse one more time. Those who choose not to digitize should still learn to customize and personalize. You need to be able to put designs together, composite those designs, and understand how that works. You need to be able to personalize, to add text, and to manipulate text. So that also means curve, arc, bridge, uppers and lowers, back curves on hats. Any text drop you should be able to do yourself. Certainly, even if you're doing hats, you might have somebody do your rear keyhole arch by the digitizer while you're doing everything else, especially if the text is not something that you can use out of a keyboard font. But personalization, chest names, monograms on sleeves, anything very simple with text, I think you should be doing yourself. And you should definitely be able to do the basics of, like I said, compositing and arranging things together, especially if we have to add two designs together that exist or add text above or below a design, something of that nature. That's something that everybody should learn to do no matter what. So these are my what I call the right reasons to digitize. They're not right. Why do I put scare quotes on that? Because even I think that you can't just say this is right and this is wrong. These are my right reasons to digitize. Responsiveness, production control, and creativity, right? So these are my experiences of digitizing. Need to be responsive, needed to control production very closely, or I need to do something creative that was difficult to get done by somebody else. Number one, responsiveness. Why did I start digitizing certain things, and why was in-house digitizing so good for us? Well, like I tell you guys, back in the day, I did a bunch of stuff for like AMC. This is a patch of mine on Better Call Saul from a screen cap. And when we were doing stuff for those folks, we often had to do it very quickly. We had to produce things in time for shooting schedules. And what does that mean? If someone comes in that morning and they need this Albuquerque police patch and I don't have it, I mean, I had multiple versions because you guys may know film alters these things so they don't look like the real police patches, even though I also did the real police patches for our city. We would need to turn that around very often in the same day. Though we have wonderful digitizers who sometimes can do that, for us, it didn't make sense for us to have to wait for that stuff. And I was already an in-house digitizer. And in fact, because we could do that, we got more designs like this because these designs often had a really tight turnaround schedule. If you have a super quick turnaround and people are willing to pay for it, by the way, we charge for that extra turnaround, you better believe. Then having someone in-house who could handle the art, who understood the interpretation and could quickly kick something out, on demand, that is something that you just can't replicate quite with an outsourced digitizer. Can you do it? Yeah, if you have a great digitizer who's got a schedule and they're willing to charge more to kick the rest of their schedule out, then you can do that. Certainly for us, because there was also a lot of problem solving involved, and that's here iteration and alteration. The next thing I'm going to talk about, it made a lot more sense, of course, to stick with in-house digitizing for a lot of this stuff. Iteration and alteration, if you need to make frequent changes on something or you need to rework it repeatedly, sometimes if you're going back and forth to get something just right because there's either a technical or creative reason, or you're going back and forth with somebody who has needs that are moving, and that can be the same kind of people who need quick turnarounds, it can be very difficult to go back and forth with the digitizer who is outside of the company. When you're consistently having to make changes and discuss things, it slows it down a bit. So being in-house for that can help with responsiveness. And last but not least, consultation with an in-house expert. I can't tell you how many times, I talked about this in a show earlier today, how many times that I was brought out from the design room, the digitizing room, the art room, to discuss with a customer what was going on. And it was both useful because I have a deep knowledge of my subject matter. So I could help them understand what was going on. They could get what I'm talking about, and I can bring in my understanding of embroidery and what's possible better than a salesperson could, even if they knew the technicalities of things. They're not going to know them like I do. And because there is something to this, and I hate to say this because it sounds a little shifty, it sounds like I'm making something up or blowing smoke, but there is something to a customer who comes in and is having these creative problems and is really frustrated when a salesperson says, let me get the artist to talk to you directly. And even though I don't consider myself an artist, being from the art room, from the design room, and coming out to the front and saying, all right, I'm here, I'm the artist, I will discuss directly with you all the needs of your production and we can make this work. There was a power to the fact of someone going, okay, I'm cutting through the BS of the sales department and I'm getting straight to the artist, the person who actually knows what the heck they're doing. And that was actually pretty valuable for us. And frankly, there was something more real than that, right? So I talk about the kind of funny version of this that, yeah, it is kind of funny because the in-house expert is just there making people feel better. But the other half of it, which is very realistic and did help us quite a lot, is that I helped to develop programs with particular companies where I was working on things that only a digitizer is really going to work on with you. And I could literally sit and talk with people about those programs and what was necessary, and then be an intermediary between kind of the business, between production needs, and what the person wanted. When we did a lot of these company store programs that had high personalization needs, and because I was also the e-commerce manager in the companies I worked for, we were able to work on things where I could come up with concepts that worked for them and iterate on them very quickly and get to an agreement point fast without going back and forth. So it's the iteration and alteration plus me directly consulting with the customer about what was going to happen. So like I said, that's one of the first reasons, responsiveness. We've got a couple of comments here that I'm going to jump in as well. So let's see what else we have here. We have Barb saying, and I agree with her, definitely need to know the basic fundamentals of digitizing. I digitize most of the time in-house. If busy, I send my designs to a digitizer. Perfectly fine way to do this. When you don't have time is a fine reason. Much better than I don't want to pay to go back in-house. But if you're already in-house and you don't have time, or the piece is going to take you too long or isn't up your alley, then that's fine to hire these things out for sure. Frank says, I do what I consider easy text. Small, simple logos. Anything too complicated gets sent out. Just takes me too long to do. Would sooner have the machine running while the digitizer designs deals with the design. Absolutely. If the needles aren't going up and down, you're not making money. That is really just part of how that works. And I really think that is absolutely worthwhile to send that stuff out. Keep production running, because no matter what it is. Now, I agree with this being also on the business side. Let's say you're a great digitizer. That's what you want to do. But every time you have to go run the books or work on HR or something else that's like that, scheduling is something that I heard from a good friend of mine, Terry, this morning on Two Other Guys show. He was talking about how scheduling was taking up his work as a production manager, and he brought someone in just to do scheduling. Much larger shops than I've worked at. But anything that's going to take you away from your core competency, I think you can hire out. And that can include some of the business tasks too. If digitizing is your thing and you are selling your business on creativity, this is absolutely a good reason, by the way. If you're selling your business on creativity and it's your creative execution that's driving it, and it's your eye and your hand as a digitizer, then it makes more sense for you to be doing the digitizing than the other stuff. Now we should hire something else out instead. Because if your particular artistic hand as a digitizer is what's selling the product, that's something you should guard. So it is unique. Whatever it is that is unique about your business has to be taken into account, which is why I don't just give you answers. When someone says, tell me yes or no, should I be digitizing? The truth of the matter is, this depends highly on the kind of clients you're working with, the kind of designs you'll be doing, and do you have these goals, these creative goals, these needs? Maybe you're making something very different, something that runs in the hoop. Earlier on, I was making patches, and back in the day, there was a period of time where trying to send something out to be made into a patch for a digitizer, they weren't really cognizant of the stacks and methods we needed for cutting and for creating the patch, or at least a lot of digitizers people were using weren't, and they had to be educated. Now, that's another option. You can also educate a digitizer or tell them exactly what you need and say, hey, is this something you can do? And work with them. That is always a possibility. But early on for me, we had so many different projects. And I'll show you some of the projects that I'm going to refer to that didn't fall within the standard corporate logo work. That when we were working with digitizers that do corporate logo work, they weren't necessarily always aware of the different things we might need and might not understand the particular mix of equipment, which goes into production control. I'm going to talk about it in another moment here. So yeah, Ramona says, we'll go start with Ramona's comment. Live photo replication in thread, not in my wheelhouse. Yeah, I don't love doing photo stitch. I also just don't think I don't find it to be the most compelling version of embroidery for me. I like a lot of texture and stitch angles, and a lot of photo replication doesn't have that. The texture starts to be secondary to the replication of the color, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just find that the flatter embroidery, either if you're doing it all in a single angle of fill, or if you've seen the kind of semi-auto process, some of them are also added to. They look very masterful and painterly, the layers upon layers of rings and curlicues of stitches that end up becoming a photographic representation. Lovely pieces on canvas, but for someone who did a lot of corporate work, logo work, apparel work, wasn't always my thing. So once again, would I use an automatic processor to work on those things and then finish out particular details? Absolutely. For my money, not my favorite thing. It's another kind of form of auto digitizing that I never really got into. And some of the shaded stuff, I did definitely do shading and gradients. But if something is completely flat and just has color upon color and it looks very much kind of like a shiny print to me, I am less interested in that as an embroiderer, and I find that's not my strength either. But yeah, doesn't mean it's a bad piece. And honestly, there are some lovely designers, incredible workers who do very painterly work that is less interested in stitch angles and dimension, height and separation of objects. Whereas I'm really into separation of objects, stitch angles, and thickness, density as well as actual physical thickness, light, and shadow. So working very differently. Different digitizers also have different hands. Like I said, you have like a painter has a hand that you can read and see that that's their painting. Digitizers are the same. And I think that's sometimes that hand is a trademark, is a signature that you want to protect. And in that case, letting another digitizer do that work might not be worthwhile to you once you do kind of find your way. Cindy says, it's nice now that most digitizers will send the working file. Time is my issue. I run the machines, so it's easier to have my logos digitized. I have the same software I can edit as needed. Totally viable way to go. But like you found out, you've got software. That's part of the thing. So you can do what you have to do when you can't get hold of the digitizer fast enough or if you have to make small changes. But yeah, working file, not all digitizers will send that. I won't necessarily say that's a good or bad thing. I didn't used to send the digitizing file. Back in the day, I wasn't someone who did that because originally it was very strange to send the digitizing file. Plus, we found alterations. People would come to me with issues with the file they were working on, and they had already been editing the file. And I'm like, all right, send me the last version you stopped editing, and we can talk about what went wrong. So there is some kind of a way you have to protect yourself as a digitizer, saying, if you make a bunch of changes to the file and then send it to me and expect all the edits for free, we might have to have a discussion over how much work you've done to the file. At the same time, having the working file is the most powerful way you can deal with scalability with small edits that might have to happen, small amounts of pull and push compensation that might crop up, especially as you change garments. Great if you can have your digitizer do the work for that. Small edits that have to be done. What I always reference is when you've got one weird garment in a large stack of customer supplied garments, you may have to make small changes just to fulfill that one weird garment. And if you can do those yourself quickly, by all means, better than waiting for a digitizer's turnaround. Carol says, super new to digitizing. I appreciate embroidery so much more now that I've dabbled in digitizing. Absolutely. You understand a lot. I think you really learn a lot more about embroidery as you start to look at how digitizing is done. And certainly it lets you understand the possibilities and it realigns kind of your expectations of what embroidery will do once you learn what digitizers do. And when you combine that with an operator's understanding of how the machine works and how thread fabric, stabilizers, and tension and hoop tension go together to make a design run outside of what the file does. All the things we do on the production end. And Liz says, hi from Germany. And hello. Hello, Liz. Happy to have you in. Thank you for joining us as well. And Ramona says, I do my own scheduling, but I do hire out my bookkeeping. See, Ramona, as a digitizer, knows that that's the product she's selling. She's going to keep doing the creative work that makes the most sense for her, whereas the work that isn't as creative, that she has somebody who can handle that better for her, is the right choice. That's fine. And the same can be true of digitizing depending on who you are. Like I said, have the control, have the option to have someone else handle that work that isn't your core. But let's get back into it. Second reason why you might want to have digitizing done in-house, why you might want to take over portions of it yourself or the whole thing yourself, is for production control. And these are things like quality and efficiency. I often show this when I'm talking about efficiency. The file here is something that was handled for me or handed to me that I handled for a customer. It was a large emblem company, and this emblem company wanted this patch to be a little bit better to run. It came to me with 12 color changes, even though it only had 6 colors. And it also was fairly heavy, fairly dense. This is the thing. It was going on patch twill, polyester twill. I didn't really have to worry about that density. And this one was a heat cut post piece, so it didn't need to have a lot of placement lines or anything else for that, or tack downs. It just needed to be pretty much a design with a nice satin edge. It's going to be cut with a heat knife after the fact. And this piece started out 12, like I said, 12 color changes. By the time I was done with it, I added traveling stitches to it. I resequenced it, and it was 6 color changes in the end, and they still layered properly and everything was fine. The original design just wasn't very efficiently made. It was probably made with different needs. I won't even say necessarily digitizers did anything wrong. They probably made it for a different purpose. But now that it's on this patch, it just didn't have the need of being split up into multiple pieces when it really could have each color run at the same time. Also, I always like to use traveling stitches instead of jumping and trimming. If I don't have to, if I can hide my traveling stitches under something that's going to run later, it's always faster and is going to have less chance of thread pulling out, less chance of thread breaks. And the other thing is, because I knew I was going on poly twill, gray poly twill, so it's a medium gray, it's between a lot of the colors, I reduced some of the density, worked with some of the underlay, and this thing was thousands of stitches less than the original piece. Quality and efficiency is a good reason to do stuff yourself, because a lot of the time, even if you talk to a digitizer about what the material is they're working on, they may have a tendency to give you a best run-of-the-mill general version of a thing that'll run on most materials. When they do that, that means you really can't control things finely. And in this case, that's what's happening here. This was not finely controlled for the exact thing that was going to run. So in this case, it made sense to do it more efficiently, and I helped out with the emblem company. So funny enough, it was actually outsourced. They outsourced it to me after they had to figure out what was going wrong. However, that kind of production control is something we really wanted in our shop. And part of that meant whenever new garments came around, when materials came around that weren't exactly what we were used to using things on, and especially because we had lots of customers, lots of corporate customers especially, that had very wide-ranging catalogs of product or gift product. There was a lot of reward programs we ran, and any one of these logos for a company, we had Power Company especially that's here in New Mexico, that would run everything on one logo, one order, everything from heavy sweatshirts, literally to burnout tissue tees, had to be run with the same logo. It had to have generally the same look, and they really did want those all embroidered, including the tees, which was always shocking to me. And it meant that adjustments had to be made for all of those fabrics, and discussing that with a digitizer, especially when these were customer supplied garments originally, that first portion of it, that's really difficult sometimes. Can you do it? Absolutely. Great digitizers. I know Ramona asks all the questions in the world. She knows what you need to do, but not all digitizers are like her. And especially if you're outsourcing with somebody who is, you're outsourcing through Fiverr, you're outsourcing through a random person who hits you up on Facebook, and a lot of people still do. When that happens, you don't really know if they're cognizant of this stuff, and they might not really deal with it the same way. What I always tell you guys is when we used to make stock designs, we made them for a piqué polo shirt, something that had a little bit of stretch, a little bit of texture, a little bit of thickness, and it would hold up okay on a sweatshirt, and it'd probably be a little too heavy for anything lighter than that polo shirt, but would run all right. That's the kind of design you often get from digitizers. It's a little too big, it's a little too dense, but it works okay in most respects wherever you put it. That's often the case you'll get, especially from an inexpensive digitizer who's just trying to get this thing out and make sure it runs okay on whatever you stick it on, and they don't want to hear back. They don't want edits because that's biting into their profit margin. If you want to do really fine control on different garments, different apparel, you may have to do some of that yourself. Now, that can be done through editing, and that can be done with a digitizer who listens. But if it's not happening for you, you might have to. Also, uniform style. I know this sounds funny, but sometimes you're handing things off to a digitizer or a digitizing company, and they might have any number of digitizers in their crew make something. And if they're not all very trained up on a uniform style, you might get a different kind of rendering from one order to the next because you're not with the same person, and they might do things differently depending on, like, how do they deal with shading, how do they deal with outlines, how do they deal with lettering that gets small, do they just blow it up? And the other thing is, people who don't ask questions, you'll find frequently they'll blow your entire design up to the place where the smallest letters will run okay. That also has to be a communication problem and a digitizer problem. But when it's happened to you over and over again, sometimes you might elect to bring things in house for that. The other thing is creating for your own equipment and capabilities. We did a tremendous amount of work that we would add specialty items to. We would add rhinestones to work. We would do, like I said, patches were pretty frequent. We would do cut applique pretty frequently as well. And we did like sublimation on top of embroidery or with embroidery or multimedia. When you're doing that kind of work, someone has to kind of understand your processes and be able to give you the right sequences, the right designs, the right work for that particular need. And that means that we really have to understand the process. Can an outside digitizer do that? Yes. Much easier when someone's in-house. And I'll say this is the other thing I've done, which I don't recommend, is back in the day, we had machines that didn't run necessarily that well, especially in the first place I worked. And sometimes we would have to do things like, even in the place I worked the longest, we would have a machine that worked okay, worked good on single color, but was not the same as the other two machines in the shop. And I understood its idiosyncrasies. I knew how it ran and what it was good for and what it wasn't and what the setup should be like. And I could tell the production staff, I've made a file that specifically works on this machine, our overflow machine that we don't always use. Set it up like this, make sure this material's on it, make sure you're running these particular speeds, get these hoops out and run them this way. Truthfully, all of our equipment should run in an ideal fashion. It should run the way it was intended to run. It should be in good repair. All the machines should be pretty well identical. That is the bad version of this. The good version of this is if you're somebody who does chenille work or sequins or something that's above and beyond, and you have that equipment, the digitizer you have can learn that equipment and can learn that media, and it can be part of what they do. Like I said, we did a lot of rhinestone work at a certain point. I learned how to lay out rhinestones both in my digitizing software and manually so that I could do rhinestone plot files for the people who were providing our rhinestones. So I learned how to design for rhinestones and multimedia. And that was something that was part of our offerings that was a little unique, and especially because I often combined them with embroidery. Creates for your equipment and capabilities. And then the other thing, output tune for your workflow. The other thing, you can certainly ask an outsourced digitizer to do this, but it's something you do all the time. Let's say, like us, we had a lot of team sports work as well as lots of work for companies where we might have a logo, but the logo probably has division names. It has people's names on them. It has to have sizing. We also had online company stores for medical that had a lot of personalization and departments on them. And I would literally output work in such a way where when you loaded a file, it was set up for one file per run on multiple heads on one machine so that you would turn heads on and off. You would run your logos, get all of your things done correctly. And the files were broken up by sizes so that when your operator comes to the table and has to work, they know that this file is only going to need one size garment, so I don't have to try and match up each head to a size, and it's done in numbers of runs on the head or stacked in multiple runs on each head so that they knew exactly how that production went. And they got an instruction manual essentially from me or instructions from me that let them know, hey, what you're going to do. First 10 color changes are the logo, and then we got color changes for the text that you're going to turn on each head on and off. Then once we get to color change 12, we're back to the logo again, unhoop all or pull off all the garments that are hooped and throw the next hoop set on while you're working. And now I've got a production management feature that's part of how the digitizing is done. If you're doing that all the time, now you could certainly lay that out yourself. A lot of that is the personalization. You could have the digitizing done separately and then do that layout yourself within your shop. But that's something where you might want to have some production control. And it makes sense that if that workflow is something you're doing all the time, maybe having someone who's at least good at that kind of workflow is worthwhile inside your shop. So that's another reason you might want to do some stuff in-house. I have a couple of other questions or a couple things to talk about here. Aaron says, love this subject matter. Thank you, Aaron. I'm glad this speaks to you. And then Santi says, where do you recommend we learn to digitize at? I've got multiple videos just on this on my channel. So look up learning to digitize on my channel. Go up to the search in my channel and look that up, and you're going to find way more information. What I'm going to say is there's multiple places you learn to digitize. I teach digitizing fundamentals and embroidery fundamentals at trade shows. So trade shows are great. Impressions Expo, Decorated Apparel Expo are great if you want to go get hands-on learning. Truthfully, show up to these videos and you're going to learn a fair amount there. Usually your software is going to have some instructional material as well as video material to help you learn to digitize. Usually it's more focused on which buttons to push and how the tools work. So check out whoever has created your software will have some information on a YouTube channel. They may often even have Q&A sessions or something of that nature or support, and you can get help there. Also, there are lots of people doing full-size courses on it. I do courses intermediately. I've got a couple up where we can go and learn digitizing. Most of mine are more elemental or go beyond and try and teach you more about dimension. But there's lots of folks who are teaching. The best thing you can do, look at their designs, see where they were working, how they were working, and what they did. If it's something that you want to learn, then go for it. Lee Caracelli, at Balboa, she actually does incredible work. Her style is a little different than mine, but she does really great work and teaches. Most of her stuff is also on Wilcom, so it might not be in the same software as yours. You'll still have to learn to translate what's going on into your software. She's one that's been teaching forever out there. DJ, who's out there, who teaches his own digitizing course. John Deere teaches a digitizing course and has for some time. Lots of folks have digitizing courses. Go look at the work that they do. Steve teaches as well. There's tons of people. You have to go look for these different folks, but look at what kind of work they do and if it makes sense to you. So yeah, Ramona says Lee and DJ are great. They are. Like I said, I don't have this feeling of trying to stamp out other digitizing teachers. Go look at the Embroidery Nerd channel. They teach you stuff and they show you digitizing. Now, it's not a fundamental course from beginning to end, but they have lots of digitizing videos to help you as well. So Embroidery Nerd on Facebook, check them out. And like I said, go throughout. The Takeup has over 150 episodes, and in those episodes, lots of those are about digitizing, and I teach you fundamentals even if you don't watch me draw. I'm not much for the watch me draw version of digitizing education, but there are people who are doing that, mostly people who are related directly to software. And like I said, Anita Good Design, that's Steve, who I was just talking about. They've got classes as well. Some people really love those. For my money, I will say some of the great stuff I've seen. Lee does some really great stuff. Also, trade magazines. Impressions is a wonderful trade magazine. Back issues, even though the magazine doesn't exist anymore, ASI had one called Stitches Magazine that I wrote for quite some time, and Stitches Magazine has great stuff. Truthfully, all of these, Graphics Pro, which used to be Printware, I wrote for Printware for many years, and all of those articles, all of those episodes or issues, not episodes, too much into the video side, all of those issues are available digitally right now on their websites. You can sign up for free accounts and look at the back catalog of magazines, and those magazine articles are all out there. So I would go look for that stuff. Are there people teaching online as well? Lots. Just be clear. Look at the work that they produce. And if the work they produce is good and you're happy with that work, that's the first sign that it might be something you want to look into. If it really matters to you for it to be in the same software as yours, look at the communities that are from the same software as yours. Look at the official support from your company, which they will often have their own official support stuff. Usually it's not watch me make a design. Most of the time it is how do I use a tool? And then, like I said, go with supplemental education like mine, like the Embroidery Nerds, like going to the trade shows, and you'll learn more and more and more. And also, the other thing that's going to teach you the best out of all of these teachers, the best teacher ever, is running embroidery. Watch designs run with a weather eye. Look at them run. Watch every stitch. Look at how they work. Look at what they do to the material. Feel how they feel when they're done running. and then get one open in some software and start making measurements. Measure stitch lengths, how far apart stitches are. That's density, rows of stitching, how far apart they are. Look at the settings that are there, how far overlapped borders are on top of fills, things like that, and it will teach you a lot. Watch the sequence, the order in which they run, and you're going to learn how to get put together. Take notes. It's how I learned, because I learned digitizing on my own in a corner, in a corner of a production room on my own, and mostly from running other people's designs and trying to copy what I saw in my digitizing software using the information from the manual. And that taught me a lot. So that's the thing. Look for that. And I hate to say this. I'll say the nice stuff first. Ramona says, I like learning under different educators. They all make a different approach. And there's always something you can pick up and use in your tools. Absolutely. The tools, the basic nature of embroidery and digitizing is going to be the same. The tools might make certain things faster for you, but every software can make a masterpiece if you know what the stitches are supposed to look like in your mind. You can envision them, and you know how they work once they're in under tension, going through the fabric, and the fabric and the stitches interacting. And as a joke, but I tend to agree on this one too. Mike says, look for teachers who actually paid for their software, LOL. Yeah, if you see the ultimate special edition on anybody's software on the top, that's never supposed to be in that bar. That's a pirate. And they might be good at digitizing. You don't know. But what I will say is people who are encouraging you to download pirated software or using pirated software to get themselves on the road, it's a little rough. I tend to think that I don't like to support that. I think that's rough. I don't like to say that stuff. But people who have invested and are giving of themselves and of their time, and not just trying to get you to subscribe to something, not just trying to get you to buy something, are probably better voices than those who are just absolutely out there to get you to buy. And Mike says, Ramona is right. Take what you like and leave the rest. Even from me, 100%. Look at what I tell you. That's great. Evaluate it for yourself. Check out my designs. Look at this tactics that I use to make them. Once you make that design, if you like how it runs, keep that tactic for yourself forever. If you don't like how it runs, don't do it. That's fine. People have different methods. I very rarely will stop and say, my method is the only way, because the true nature of embroidery is this. You are dealing with the physicality of thread and needle. There are things that will go right and wrong depending on whether or not you understand how that works. But how you achieve coverage is getting enough thread in the right configuration on top of that design and not having a bunch of distortion and warping and puckering. If that's through just really balanced densities, support materials, or adding underlay in the right way, those are different approaches that can reach it. And whatever one makes the most sense to you, takes the least amount of time, and gets the right result, is the right one. I tend to like to do everything with thread. I don't use a lot of support materials. Why? Because I want to stick something on a machine and run it and forget it. Not that I'm not going to watch it, because I do, but that I know the thread's going to hold up as long as the thread of the design. So I use that instead of support materials and plastics and things, because most of the time I can't guarantee those are going to hold up the same times of thread, but thread will hold up as long as thread. It is easy to find that out. That's why I do that. But that's my method. Also, my way for laying down the stitches might not be yours. We already talked about Lee Caraselli, who we love, who Ramona says is amazing. A lot of her designs have lots of color in them. They're very painterly, but it means that she layers a lot of fills together at the same angle. Very wonderful color, very much like watercolor, beautiful work. But to me, I like it's a little flat because all the stitches are at the same angle. And I like to have multiple different angles of stitching and textures next to each other. I will have probably less shading, but more texture. She will have less texture, more shading. Is her work or my work better? No. It's different work, and that's okay. And your work is going to be different. And also, I'm a logo guy. I used to do commercial work. That's my primary stuff. When I do artistic work, sometimes I go off the bead. But I often tend to think in a very graphical way instead of a painterly way. That's my hand, and that's all right. Okay, so let's get to like kind of our last method or reason for why we would do this stuff, and that's creativity. And then I'm going to show you some examples as kind of a palette cleanser before we finish up for the day. But this is the next one, creativity. Let me get my head out of the way here. This is the other reason why you might want to bring stuff in-house or have some control of that for yourself. And this is the thing. Creativity, right? Experimentation. If you want to do something different, in this case, though a lot of folks in the home arena are going to go, really, you're doing this? Number one, this is a long time ago. Number two, in the commercial world, 3D lace like you just see here being attached to a garment by another portion of the embroidery, super weird, super rare. When I did it, I hadn't heard of it before. I thought I was developing something entirely brand new. Had somebody probably done some sort of lace piece like this? Absolutely. I'm sure somebody had done this before I did this. At the same time, I had never seen it done like this on a multimedia print. So I made these dragonflies for this piece called the Dragonfly Goddess, where I essentially copied the printed wings that were there, made a 3D lace structure, stitched the wings out on soluble material ahead of time, washed those out, and then used the body of the dragonfly to attach them to make some really big statement pieces for a gallery show. This is weird work. Not most of the work that I would do. However, we got paid a lot to make some really cool pieces. Lovely, right? Lovely way to handle these things. And also, great way to stretch my own creativity. But this is something that to describe this and to handle all of the artwork and the like, we also had this thing hand quilted in house to describe and work on this. And by the way, my lovely mother did the hand quilting on this, so it's another thing to see. Hand quilting by machine, so machine quilting but manually driven. We did this stuff in house. This is something that you don't always see, and it's not really normal for a digitizer to know how to do this or to think about this, especially not in the commercial space these days. The line between artistic and logo can be very different, or very much more gray than it used to be. But this kind of experimentation to do something quickly for a quick turnaround as well, something that had to be done for an event, it might be hard to go back and forth if you have a 24-hour dwell every time you talk to your embroiderer. Next thing, bespoke solutions. If you're doing something that's very particular to one particular usage material, or I'm going to show you in a second, one piece that just has to go out in a certain way and it's not something you're going to do any other time, or it's weird, it's rare, the material acts differently than anything else. You want to use an applique, I'll show you this in a second, with upholstery material that doesn't run the same way as the rest of the stuff you might use. These are bespoke solutions that trying to describe to a digitizer might be hard, or honestly, you'll still have to have the knowledge of a digitizer to describe what you need to someone who's doing the work. Can you do it outsourced? Absolutely. But if you're someone who wants to learn that stuff, you might bring it in house. Like I said, non-standard materials. And then last but not least, unique treatments. If you're doing specific kind of carving or shading or something that is not normal for commercial work, you want to make textures. You guys may have seen my episode on vintage embroidery, where I'm trying to make textures that look like hand-guided machine embroidery. So sometimes like hand embroidery itself or cross stitch, that might be a little more normal, but we're trying to like emulate a knit pattern, which I've done before with big cotton threads. So it's non-standard materials that are thick and weird and take big needles and different stitch sizes. Or we're doing those unique treatments where we are just, even though we're in with normal needles, normal embroidery, we want textures that are not necessarily something you would usually see. Doing something with those different textures can be difficult to describe to a digitizer. So this is another reason why we might want to do this. And I'm going to show you some examples in a second, but these are also good reasons. If we want to experiment, maybe we're trying to make a new product or stitch something in the hoop that was never been stitched in a certain way, or we're combining a kind of multimedia that's not usual. We want to make a solution specifically for one kind of person. I did a lot of work for some medical companies where they had a material that was super weird. They had a neoprene material that was fairly thick, so we got a thick foam layer, and on top it had like a French terry cloth texture. So here I'm trying to fight between cutting up this neoprene foam and getting the amount of coverage I needed to knock down and hold down this terry cloth texture on top of this fused material. And these were being made into light treatment bands. So these things had LEDs that were being embedded in them after the fact and had this logo that had to go on the back of them. So big cut elements that couldn't be hooped in the normal fashion, that had texture on one side and foam in the middle. You should see how distorted those designs are in the underlay that I had to make. Massive pull distortion because everything shrunk incredibly when it went through that neoprene foam. These kind of bespoke solutions, yes, can we have a digitizer make them? Yes, but it's a lot of back and forth. I was able to make those in-house and work directly with the company and understand what was worthwhile, what was not, what materials were okay for them, what were not, and get that worked out so that we ended up making tons, I mean, hundreds upon hundreds, thousands of these cuts to be made into a product. So it is just rare to do some of that stuff. Some digitizers are awesome. And that's the thing. It really is a difference. You can have some digitizers who do very difficult work for you and they're specifically going to do that, or you can do it the other way. And Mike actually makes mention of this, which I love. I love having my go-to digitizer for the regular work so I can keep the extremes. And he's done some incredible work with like patches that have a body and density to them that are rare. It's not something you see all the time. A filled patch, beautiful stuff that Mike's put together. But that kind of experimentation is something that he sat on the machines and worked out and got together with that process, with those materials, so that he has a working process. And it's something that I've done very similarly. That creativity can be both technical and artistic. And in any case, I think those are the good reasons. So let me kind of bring that back again. Let's talk about those. So what are those great reasons for bringing in in-house digitizing that I think make the most sense? And these are they, right? Responsiveness. Got to do it quick. Got to turn it around. It needs to get done by a certain date right now. I need to do edits immediately. I can't wait 24 hours. I can't wait 8 hours. Same day turnarounds. That stuff makes sense. And if you can charge for it, by the way, none of this happens unless someone's willing to give you the adequate value of keeping it in house. You have to have somebody who develops a large body of knowledge to really do all this. Lots of testing, lots of understanding. Production control. Efficiency, working on proper materials, working with the kinds of machines we want to work with, doing multimedia that's specific to what we have available. Another reason for this these days would be the color reel. If you have a company that lays into a color reel, I don't know if you just want to have a digitizer handle that, or if you want to have somebody in-house who understands how those things run. Specialty equipment can cause that, can be a reason for you to bring this stuff in. Creativity, doing something that is off the beaten path, that is not the norm, experimentation, and taking on jobs, whether it's in kind of the other hand, like productiveness, the responsiveness. Creativity can also be taking on jobs that are hard to manage. I've got one that I'm going to show you of a curtain set that I had to learn how to do repeats in a certain way so that I could do mass spans for very expensive curtains that were going into a hotel. And this is something that's not normal for a commercial shop to work on. But when people were trying to farm this job out and this designer is looking all over town, and I was the first person to say, well, I can do the experiments here and then we can work with production to get this done. Absolutely. I'll work on it because we have creative in-house, design in-house, digitizing in-house. We can work this out with you. Here's what it's going to cost. And we laid out a very decent amount of money and they said yes. And unfortunately, it meant that the first piece was done by me 16 inches at a time or 15 inches at a time as I moved a hoop manually across the piece. So for those of you in the home world who have small machines and make big pieces by moving that hoop, I have all of the love and respect in the world for that mess because that is really difficult sometimes and is not the way I love to work. Eventually, we had it done on a multi-head machine, which I'll show you. But that's part of that creativity too, is creative responses to problems. Can the right digitizer make all of this possible, even outsource? Absolutely. But not all of us have Ramona. Not all of us have access to somebody who's really going to work with you. Not all of us have access to someone who's going to do that kind of work. And if you are running on a budget and you're trying to get a digitizer who really does incredibly fine work, they're going to cost more. You are correct. So that's where budget can come into it. But that I really think by the time we're doing specialty work, in-house or outsource, we need to be talking to our customers, our clients, and explaining to them the reality of these things, how to create this stuff and what it takes, and the fact that it is worth more. It is not the same as our usual work. So let's take a look at some of my pieces that I want to talk. I call them odd work in this particular set of pieces, just to kind of show you some of the stuff that made sense to me as odd work. And here's one just to show you. I won an award for that piece, multimedia design. This is the overall jacket back. I don't always remember to show you guys the entire jacket back and what it looked like. Though this is the jacket back, it also, these little dragonflies went up onto the sleeve. It had a left chest. We had a couple other places off of the print where there were dragonflies with the wings on the piece. Just a fun thing to show you. So that's some of that kind of work. And here's that close-up once again. You can see that one, get a little bit closer on it. So it was laid into the print. It's not entirely perfect, but it's a lovely piece. The quilting was really quite interesting. So something like that, creativity. And let's get into some of this other stuff. This is that me showing the first sample from the outsourced person of that design that we had to do for those curtains. Eventually, that piece was done on multi-head machines, and this is what it looked like from the person we had doing the final production. She was using a full sash frame. But what I have to explain to you is every other shop these people went to in our state, and these are people from another city, not from my city, said no, didn't understand it, go look for someone else, handle this somewhere else. We can't work with you. Um, in this particular piece, I had to use material that wasn't normal to me, that was fairly expensive by the yard. We had to do some interesting kind of shading, semi shading techniques on the satin stitch borders. It is not a complicated border, but the process of putting it together and getting the repeats correctly and making it work with the fabric that they chose took some doing. And it was something that took creative input. And also, there's just little things that I think you should know how to do. This is one of my very first reasons I ever used a light mesh fill, or some people call a nap tacking stitch. Now, if you have Embrilliance enthusiast, it has this bi-directional stitch. Brian worked with me. I fought with him a little bit on it. He agreed that it was something he wanted to add, but he originally had a unidirectional stitch, and I said I would really like to see that mesh be part of our software too, the way I do it, and we put that in. So now you can do this automatically with like 2 clicks. Back in the day, I digitized this piece to go on. These are wristbands, so super thick terry cloth wristbands. We had to put a very nice monogram on them for this bar and grill. And this particular piece was one of the first reasons I had to use a knockdown, or something like the knockdown we have now, but a bidirectional, a mesh filling stitch. And that's what I think anybody should learn how to do. You should learn how to draw and use your your digitizing software well enough that if you needed to create one of these mesh stitches like this, a nap tagging stitch, or if you need to do some other sort of digitizing that just supports your materials, that's something you should be able to do, right? I talked about the hand of designs, or things that a digitizer specifically does. This kind of work is what people consider my hand, which is that I will take something in a single color like this, the bottom of this skull. And this is a piece I've shown you guys many times. And it has multiple stitch angles and contrasts, as well as different stitch textures, so that even when I'm in a single color, I have a tendency to carve these pieces dimensionally to make them a little more lively under moving light, which is the curved back of a human being, is a place where light is going to change as they move and as it goes across those pieces. So that's something where it's like that kind of hand is creative, and it's a worthwhile reason that people sometimes come to me. They like that hand. They like the carving. They like the multiple textures. They like the use of open fills, things like that that might not be immediately laid out in the art. And stuff like even a simple piece like this is something most digitizers will know to do. But to separate stitch angles on single color items like we have in this lion, why do we have this different shine in the shoulder, in the leg, and the tail? Because I've divided what could have just been a slab of fill into multiple satin stitch and auto split satin, length limit satin sections. And it was just a little bit of creativity. Of course, there's the big bad stuff like this piece I did that I always show you guys, where it was really a lot of creative jumps. There's a design thinking that had to go into going from this original picture on the left to the final picture on the right that we ended up with. And that's something where that's a heavily detailed piece. Honestly, a lot of shops are going to outsource this. This is something I did very specifically for a show piece. It was for a magazine, so not the same. Whereas this is right off the production floor. And this is one that I have to explain and say I did a lot of stuff that I will tell you generally not to do. This is for Gilly Loco Salsa, a local salsa company. They came to us with literally a 24-hour turnaround to make, I believe the original order was a couple dozen jackets, a little bit more. I think it was 28 jackets. And these jackets had to be done overnight. Investors were coming for a party for the holidays, and they had to have a design that looked like their original logo. Their original logo is filled, and I have shading in it and everything else. But we had to make something compelling for a jacket back, and all we had was a small left chest and hat logo. So what I did, against my own better judgment, I started by blowing up their original logo from a left chest to jacket back size and seeing what I could salvage. Salvaged quite a bit, and then I created from it this piece that was a custom applique piece that still had fill inside of the sombrero here. We used some fills on the back of this, but the interesting thing you'll see in here, we used an upholstery material that I cut myself on a roll-fed plotter cutter with a 60-degree blade, and a material called Magic Mask, which is a sticky mask material, very much like the tray on a Cricut machine, but in a roll format. So you can roll material onto it and squeegee it down so it would hold it. And we cut all of these, well, I cut all these pieces. So anything that's wrong with it is also my fault. And we cut these upholstery pieces. So we had this cool faux reptile texture that was inside of each one of these pieces, this faux snakeskin texture inside of the lizard, and created all these jackets overnight. So weird material, something difficult to describe. It was multi-process. I had to create cut lines that were specific to each particular portion of the thing, cut those things manually, And we had to do, truthfully, the thing you're going to notice is a lot of these borders are really thick. Why are they really thick? Because this stretchy material was really difficult to work with and cut, and it was imprecise. So even inside the tail here, rather than try and cut or do little loops, I used satin stitch layers with a satin stitch border to make the gap inside of the tail look good so that we could not have to worry about trying to cut a flexible strip out of this. The cutting went around the outside edge here and didn't have all of that intricacy here. But as you can see, a piece that worked very well. I did some extra compensation work to make sure the text looked good. Luckily, it's a kind of text that was pretty forgiving, but that stuff had to be done quickly. Weird use of material, stuff that might be a little different for your digitizer. This one's not so hard, but rip away glitter flake applique. I produced the art for the sublimation print. This doesn't require a cut file. It's a great thing about this is you sublimate a big slab of this white glitter flake, you throw it down, run your design on top of it, and then rip away the edges. Fantastic way to get some incredible multicolor stuff happening. And that's some green and red chili for Albuquerque, New Mexico. Things like this that were kind of difficult. I've done lots of work where I transition off of the front of a hat onto the mesh. And just this area of the wing that you can see here on the side of this piece, one of those, like I said, Knob Hill Bar and Grill, when they existed, were a wonderfully creative company that let me get away with murder, or at least they asked me to get away with it because I constantly had to do interesting things with their logos. But you can believe that there is different compensation that's going on over this mesh and that things are stitched differently here than it is over on the other side. We're going to be on the flat part of the cap. I had to do some things to make that mesh stable and to get what is literally a straight stitch outline around this thing to run decently on that mesh. It wasn't perfect, but it looked pretty good. And all kinds of manners of different things that I've dealt with. The texture inside of this Vietnam vet patch that's made to look like the award ribbons. I sent this off. I had done the digitizing and sent it to a patch company. They continually tried to send this patch back to me with standard fills inside, but that's not what the customer approved or wanted. They wanted that texture, and that meant I was digitizing these bars of fill. So it looked like both the texture of an award ribbon, and it was very similar to classic military badges that were done on zigzag machines where filling was done by overlapping callings of stitching. So it was referring to something. There was some design work there. So that's another creative reason why you might do stuff in-house. Working with different equipment. Had to do custom patches, lots of custom patches in my time. And one of the things we did is use the Madeira MFS system or the plastic patch method. And at the time, this was pretty rare. These days, you could use Embroidery's Merrily software and make a patch like this in 3 clicks. Or Stitch Artist 3 has this same setup inside of it, where if you use the patch tool, you could do that easily. Otherwise, you had to know all the settings, and there's 3 different fills that go into it, as well as some different edge running protocols to make sure this thing doesn't tear out. Truthfully, it's not that specialty maybe these days, but when I came out with it, literally the first time I worked on this material, Madeira sent it to me because they wanted me to test it and show people how it worked. So we were early to the game. And a lot of the custom patch work I did was just stuff that had to be done quickly, had to be done creatively, and had to be done to spec for movies and TV. And it meant that having direct contact and control over the art made a lot of sense to us. Having a great digitizer will take a lot of that up, but it doesn't take all of it. And like I said, specialty work, lots of little specialty pieces, the Knob Hill pieces where we had all this texture, the rough cut appliques. Once again, all these different patchworks. One of the things I won my first award for, and I just have I don't have the sample here. In fact, the sample's on denim that I have personally, but it wasn't on Denim Run. Looks a bit more like this. Really light contour stitching, making a full jacket back of a hot air balloon for the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta. We did this super light design. Why? Not because the super light design looks great. I think it does, but the original reason why this was done is that the first decorator that was supposed to do the jacket back to this piece bowed out and left them holding the bag with all of the jackets that the pilots were supposed to wear. They had to be done quickly, and they had to be done in-house. So they had to be done in the state, in-house with us. And that meant that we had to reduce stitch counts to make sure we could hit our time and our costs for this customer. So what did I do? Instead of these big, fully filled balloons, I did this. I made contour stitch elements, and then I had a gold metallic flame on the inside of the balloon that shone through, just like the balloons glow when you light them up at night. This concept of seeing through the pieces and having this very light design was something that, describing that to somebody, it's a design problem as well as a digitizing problem. So it's something that not every digitizer is going to do immediately, and you'd have to explain it all in order to get what you wanted. So a lot of that stuff, replicating this patch that I did for the Vietnam vets as well. I did this piece where they gave me this piece and wanted a cleaner version of it, but they still wanted the art to look like this patch, the original patch that was given to them over there, not like the official version of the badge that you can find on any military site, right? You don't find that version of this badge. It doesn't exist in official artwork. So he kept on getting a nice, clean version of this dragon that looked nothing like the patch that they actually wore. So I made this patch instead, eventually had it produced by a badge company, but digitized this patch. As rough as this looks, as harsh as this art is, it fits the bill of looking like the original and not like the design that is official to their company. And I've done lots of artistic pieces that are interesting. This is a skirt, and this is from the hip to the ankle, a large piece that was a full feather stitched, colored metallic, and rhinestone peacock feather. I mean, ask your usual commercial digitizer for that, and they're going to have a lot of questions. Some of them will do it, some of them won't. This is something where development had to be done. Rough cut appliques with a custom chain stitch motif wasn't really something that was around at the time. Nobody was really doing it that much. Carved canvas work. They're just things that are rare. Now, some of these are creative works that I did specifically to show off these techniques, but a lot of this stuff had to do with having a different hand and doing creative work and doing quick turnarounds. All the movie stuff, quick turnarounds, and often creative work as well. Carving up a silhouette design in order to have some dimension inside of a single colored piece. That's just a part of the work that is specific to me. I often kind of train other people to do the same thing. But that's, like I said, that is kind of a specific thing I do. And if you like that hand, that's something you might pay for. And production control, looking at things in a really fine-grained way. We had caps that were causing issues, and here's just something I'll show you. Something that I will do is put them under magnification. Look, we had some jaggedness. This wasn't too bad, but if you look at the crown of this hat, it's got knit mesh on the outside. It was causing jaggedness in the piece, and we were having this weird patterns and gaps in the fill. And when we finally looked at the piece under magnification, take a look at this piece, and what you're going to see is these are very stiff, thick, kind of they're almost the width of the needle shank. Not the shank, the neck of the needle. We have these thick plastic bars that were woven into the buckram. And so we were running this piece. Whenever we'd hit one of these, it would pull the thread over one side or the other, and some of them would break. They would you'd see these little broken bars sticking out of the back of it. Turned out the problem was the hat. That's production control. And you wouldn't know that unless you were working on that specific hat. So if my digitizer might sew it on even if they're an awesome digitizer who does stitch outs and sews everything out on hats for you, they might not sew on that hat that you're having trouble with. And now we're communicating back and forth trying to explain it. So that's the kind of thing where having someone in-house makes sense to help with that work, or working with non-standard materials, super thick wool threads. We now have people who will, like Vitor knows how to work with them very well. I know Ramona knows how to work with them. I know Justin knows how to work with them. But I know lots of folks that if you told them you were using these threads, we'd have a lot of questions to answer to get your densities right and your stitch lengths right. And like I said, all of these are just kind of little examples. I've got tons of them. And honestly, a lot of it was just needing to figure out stuff we needed to do. Lots of creative stuff we've done over the years. And I talked about Merrily a lot back in the early days. The other thing I did very early, this is a file that I think was from 2014, I believe was this particular file. I worked on a bunch of different patch edging that I did with motifs that I showed at some of the trade shows after I started teaching it. But way back when, was trying to figure out the patch edging. Nothing like what we do now, but it's stuff that I showed. And it was, I actually stopped doing it for a while because it was taking too much work to get this stuff to work. But that's one of my original files from way back when. Trying to explain that in an era that it wasn't common would have been really hard. Just like the chain stitch motifs, just like working that weird 3D lace, doing specialty techniques became part of what I did to solve problems. Really, and honestly, way back into my career, because I've been working since 99, 2000 as a digitizer, and we continued to work on that stuff and figured that stuff, right? It was something where saying yes, right? Saying yes was a big thing for us. If you had to combine some sublimation and patch edging and some textures to make things work for a one-day turnaround, we could do it. We would charge you for it, absolutely, but you would get that work done. That's a reason to do it. Was any of that about not having the money to throw at a digitizer? Absolutely not. Times where I couldn't do work or we got too clogged up, we would have digitizers on staff or on hire that we would bring to do these things. We would have stuff outsourced. Like I told you guys, if somebody really wanted a breed animal or their particular animal on a jacket or on the left chest, sometimes I would do it if we had time. It's a very time consuming thing that takes a lot of skill. Often enough, if somebody's like, I've got a show dog and I want stuff all over, I'm contacting my person who does great show dogs because I know they're going to run circles around me. Maybe I run circles around them with logo jacket backs or creative textures or something. I don't know. People who do animals or something else. They're really great. But at the same time, we've got strengths. That's fine. But all right, we've got a last couple of folks with comments, and then we're going to go ahead and call it for the day. Liz says, and I'll just be eyes over the top of Liz's big comment here. I started digitizing because I realized what a train smash most online bought designs were. Oh, word. Yeah, a lot of stock designs are rough. Mostly because people can't tailor them to the particular needs, but also because there's a lot of just, and I'll just say this, and I want to say this, it sounds a little bit rough, but the big, giant thousands of grab bag, very cheap designs, tons of them are auto digitizing straight away, or they're very old designs, some of them, and that doesn't make them bad. Lots of old designs are great, but they're just big collections of whatever they could grab together. And some of the stuff, it's just run an image through auto digitizing and let it go to stitch. Not really any editing whatsoever. And usually cheap, high volume, buyer beware. But registration problems, bulletproof designs, 100%. Most designs for stock are going to be more dense than others because they're not tuned for fabrics. Design not suitable for polo and t-shirt fabrics. Oof. I can go on, but now I recognize a smooth running design. Plus, I corrected some bot designs that are in Wilcom. Editing is another great way to learn. If you can see what's wrong, you can see that there's things that aren't running correctly, and you've seen designs that do run well, and you can make a comparison. That's another way to ferret out how things should be. I am a beginner, but at least I know what to look out for and can solve some basic issues. That's where this all starts. Admittedly, company I was with really wanted me to learn digitizing so I could take it over, so they would stop hiring it out. But this is also in an era where digitizing costs a lot more. You have to remember, when I started, there were still people around charging hundreds of dollars per design for sure. And I never did a left chest less than $100 at the in-house company I worked at. Now, I also did a lot of design work. As you can perceive for what I've told you guys, I did a lot of consulting and design work as well. So it's not exactly the same as somebody you're just shoving some art, you're shoveling art at them and they're shoveling back designs. Not the same thing. However, it's just a lot less expensive, especially overseas digitizers these days, than it used to be. So I am going to say that, though I worked right up to the end of my career still charging that, and people were really not blinking an eye. What they got was worth it to them. If you provide the value, that's how it works, right? That's how it works. So I agree with you, though. A lot of stock designs, bulletproof, don't run that great. It's often the way things are. And so lots of folks still working out. So that, like I said, AJ says, yeah, hey, I'm so late. Love the classroom times. Hey, love to have you in. Catch the replay when you have a chance. No worries, man. Be late. Be late when you have to be. Do the real thing. Keep the needles moving. Don't worry about watching a show with me in it. Ramona says, I'm still looking for a realistic photo digitizer. Please share if you have one. I don't have one off the top of my head who I really use. It's just not something I have a lot of call for personally. There are people who do incredible work in it, but a lot of them that I know are really super artistic. The guys you've seen who work for ZSK, you can't even really contact them, and they do large art pieces. Those are the people I'm familiar with. Otherwise, I don't really have somebody who I go to for that, but I'm just going to just kind of reveal my bias. I really didn't do a ton of realistic painterly photo work. That's not my chief thing. Saw some really interesting stuff from Creative Skill recently. So if you see Creative Skill, CR8 Creative Skill, I saw some interesting stuff they've done, but I haven't used them. So, check them out. See if they've got some files that run. Ask them about it, because that's somebody who's out there. He's he's overseas, invested in color reel, invested in good software, is out there running ZSK hardware, and has done some pretty incredible work. So yeah, check them out. Creative Skill. And I can always get you a link afterwards. AJ says, AJ Embroidery and Apparel, Gold Coast. Thanks to your classroom. Made milestones in my digitizing and work better, overall knowledge for better outcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Love it. Thank you for saying that too. Also, question for you. Thin t-shirts give me a lot of downtime. Any safe tips there? Thin t-shirts are hard. Watch out for thin vertical lines. I would use a topper on t-shirts. because personally, anything that's got some grain to it, I want to use a topper. So some solvay, some dissolvable topper is going to be good on those. Keep your densities light. Use structural underlay before excess density to get the coverage that you need. And that's what you need to do. Keep your satin stitches wide enough that they're going to hold up. Really super thin satins on anything with texture can cause problems. And you're just going to have to keep it light. Use every stitch you need and none that you don't. Keep the lightest density you can and do some testing on thin tees. You can also use performance wear stabilizers, whether that is classic no-show mesh or you're using a couple of layers of like the action back. Just make sure they're 45 off from each other. The only thing I'll say is on thin t-shirts, that action back is going to add up and be pretty heavy. I'd rather keep my design light and use one layer of something like a no-show mesh, but keep those densities down as best you can and watch out for small vertical details on ribs always. So probably not answering all your questions, but might help a little bit. Mike says, so much easier to hire a mechanic if you're somewhat aware of how the car works, knowledge of digitizing power, even if you don't do it. 100% golf clap for Mike. Absolutely the case. Learn enough about digitizing that you think you could do it, even if you aren't going to, so you can ask for the stuff that you need always. Ramona says, overseas $5, no communication, no edits, flat files. My fee, 1 to 6 colors, $25 includes edits, communication, sizing. Boy, you're doing the Lord's work, Ramona. She's doing a good work for not too much. So definitely check it out, folks. And yes, AJ, 100%. Needles running, ching, ching. That is the way. Keep that cash register ringing. Don't worry about watching shows. I get to do these shows now because I'm on the other side of the fence. If I was still digitizing right now, I'd have to make up that time. As a commercial runner, don't feel bad about having to do the thing that makes the money. Catch this stuff on the podcast level. Liz, yeah, Cheslow, 0K Germany, 45 euro. Yeah, believe it. I believe it. The man, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if I'm the man, but I'm certainly a man who tries to get things done. And like I said, we got a couple things going on, but yeah, absolutely. We're out past our time. What I'm going to say is this. Do you need to digitize? Let's go our last little review of the stuff. Last way to answer the question. Should I digitize my own images? The first thing I'm going to say about this, your own or in-house, I think it is a wonderful way to do embroidery, to understand this stuff. You should know digitizing well enough to communicate with the digitizer and get what you need. If you want to do digitizing, and if you have a compelling reason, if it makes sense because you need responsiveness, you got to do it quick and turn it around. Production control, certain kind of way you want to run it on your equipment, and you're going to do something particular with that equipment. You want efficiency, creativity, and you want to really exercise that creativity yourself and do that iteration in-house, it can totally make sense. Or work with someone who understands this. But working with someone who understands this means knowing enough about digitizing to know the difference. If this makes sense to you, great. But obviously, like I said, what's the worst reason to learn to digitize? If you don't want to pay for it, it's not a great reason. It's a large commitment, and I'm actually going to leave you with the words that my designer, the artist in-house, said to me when I moved up into the design room. So I started out as a machine operator, you guys know, worked in the back in the warehouse, and my original digitizing station was in the warehouse next to the machines. And eventually they wanted me to work with the clients more and to work in the front with the design software as well as digitizing software. And this is the thing. When I came to that front office, at first, my designer was quiet. I had to share space with him. It was a little tight, and I thought for sure he hated me. He was quiet. It was dark in there, and I didn't understand. I thought, man, here I am usurping this space. He's not going to like me being here. And after a little while, he turned to me and he said, so you're doing all that embroidery stuff, huh? And I said, yeah. And he's like, man, I'm so glad you did that. They tried to get me to do all that on top of the print. And when I started, it was like an entirely new career. And I looked at him, and honestly, after having learned to do the work and having already been doing all this, trial and error and beating my head against the wall and making this stuff work, I had to stop and say, yeah, it is an entirely different career. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. If you want to do it, you absolutely can. If you're the kind of person who wants to tweak and work on stuff, you absolutely can. If you're not sure, no matter who you are, if you've got an embroidery machine, have digitizing software, especially in an era where it's not expensive. My first seat of full commercial digitizing software was $16,000. Today, I could give you all of that power for less than 1,000. For in case of stitch artist, I could get you to stitch artist too for much less than that. You could absolutely start digitizing if it means something to you and it's something that you want to do. But understand that it is totally okay that you never do all of it, that you maybe never do the most detailed stuff, and you just want to start and try. That is totally okay. Also, you can start and then change your mind. You can start and realize that you want to outsource. Hold on to that digitizing software. It gives you that control and it gives you the opportunity to do that work. And what I will say on top of all of this is if you do choose to do it, you're a creative soul who likes to push those stitches around. It is incredibly rewarding, and I cannot recommend it enough as a way to do embroidery. So with that, folks, I'm going to let you go. I got some other wonderful comments in here, and I love them. I just want to say, I'll go ahead and show just a few of the comments real quick. Liz says, thanks so much. Leave a link where I can take an online course with you. Yeah, we've got more courses. Go ahead and head to my website and get to the contact us. So ericcampbell.com, hit the contact us page and leave me a message, and I will reply to you with that if you want to see it. Certainly, we have other stuff going on. Mike says, personalization, I'd lose my mind waiting for it to outsource a name drop. Don't outsource name drops. Get lettering software right now. Trust me, it's inexpensive and worth every dime. And Liz says, I'm a perfectionist. My husband says I do surgery, not digitizing. Ooh, wow, you and I. High five and also hang our heads in shame. My name is Eric, and I am a digitizing perfectionist as well. However, sometimes it makes for some really good designs. With that, folks, I'm going to let you go. We got other comments, but I'll catch you up in the comments later. Go out there and try something out. If you think you want to digitize, go get a demo version, play with it. Even if it's not saving, play with the tools, check it out, take a look, analyze some designs that you already love, bring them into software, measure everything, tear them down, watch them run back and forth, watch them run on the machine, and think about this stuff. The elemental nature of the stitch is the building block for everything we do. And if you understand that, you understand embroidery. And honestly, never feel bad about where you are in this process. Everyone is learning. Everyone continues to learn. And if you stop learning, you might as well quit the whole darn thing. Well, all right, folks, it was great to have you here for Education Friday on another episode that I just couldn't keep short. And I can't wait to do it again next week.